original idea of building a community around these sharing economies, it's not really there anymore. And it used to be this egalitarian feeling of, wow, we're all in this together. I get to share a few things, you share a few things with me. That doesn't really exist anymore. And it's very transactional in nature. You want something from me? Pay me. I'll give you something, or perhaps, at some point, I have to pay you. So very transactional in nature, not so much focused on community development any longer. And most interesting is Wikipedia is the only one that still seems to retain this aspect. And it's an outlier also because they're the only one that hasn't taken a single dollar of financing from private equity or venture capital, while all the others have. And we'll get back to that in just a moment. So there's a few key problems I want to highlight with sharing economies today. Now, I don't want to characterize those 6 elements as necessarily important or necessary for a successful sharing economy, but a few of them were actually part of the original story. It was the reason why we bought into those platforms, namely the activation of idle assets, the peer-to-peer nature, how decentralized it is, and not focused on a single central authority, right? And finally, a sense of community. So these 3 aspects seem to have been lost. Now, the first problem I want to highlight is an aspect called winner-take-all phenomenon. In most cases across the internet, you have the situation where you are the top player, you're the biggest platform out there, or you're dead. There is no second place. There is no third place. At Facebook, they're number 1. Who's number 2? You can't really think of the number 2. It doesn't come to mind very easily because for a lot of these online platforms that continue to scale, they achieve success because they're number 1, and there really is nobody else, just because it's hard to compete with somebody that's already achieved that degree of scale. So with this never-ending quest of becoming the biggest out there, platforms that are continuing to grow and still in that growth phase, they're forced to seek out VC financing in order to achieve scale. And when they take that VC money, there's a very strong set of strings attached to that money that they've taken. And that's a very strong fixation on ROI, return on investment. So these new shareholders, they're very focused on, okay, so when are we going to scale to the point where we can get even more profit, right? And that's scaling perhaps even to a point where it doesn't even make sense for the original business model and for the original vision. And it scaling above all of their objectives, as we mentioned there. The second problem is activation of underutilized assets is no longer being applied. So the idea of us being asset light as we live our lives is not so much a focus any longer, and that's an issue. Third, rather than focusing on building value in the community and ecosystem, value now seems to accrue very much to the platforms themselves. And you just need to look at the market cap, the valuation of a lot of these platforms to see how much value has accrued to the platforms, to a very centralized platform rather than community. And finally, although initially disruptive, these sharing economy platforms have become massive incumbents in their own right. And once they've achieved that scale, they've also been able to enjoy a fair amount of regulatory arbitrage. They hire armies of lawyers, lobbyists to be able to basically remake the rules of the market as they see fit. And it makes for a very difficult environment for other smaller upstarts and startups to be able to compete. So how can we resolve some of these problems? There are some token-enabled solutions that I want to highlight, and not to say that they are a panacea. They don't necessarily solve all the problems, but it's a step in the right direction. And the first challenge is being VC-backed in order to survive and then leading to a fixation on ROI. Well, having a token sale solves that. You no longer have to play necessarily by the rules of the VCs. Number 2, being too asset-heavy, not allowing for the activation of these idle assets. That can also be remedied by, again, reducing the need for scaling immediately and scaling more in a natural way by, again, doing a token sale and having more control over your own business and its business model. Third, value accruing only to the platforms rather than to the community. Now this is interesting. So we've all heard about tokens and how they're representative of the protocol. So owning the token especially utility tokens, often then leads to having ownership of the protocol layer, which oftentimes is where the value accrues in a token economy. So this is a way for value to accrue to the token holders rather than to the platform. Fourth, new incumbents that basically take over and make it for an anti-competitive space. Well, this is to be determined. It's still a work in progress, but if we can get to a point where across jurisdictions there are more clear and standardized regulatory frameworks, then we really do believe that a token economy could be a new paradigm, a new way to build a sharing economy that still makes for a much more competitive space. Based upon the merits of the token, the merits of the economy alone, you'll be able to raise enough money and be able to build out that vision. A quick note on the knowledge industry, which is where RedPulse is in. And if you look at down below, there's a scale between general knowledge and specialized knowledge. Interestingly enough, as you move from left to right, in terms of how many people are interested in general knowledge, well, a lot of people are. But as you move to the right side, the so-called long tail, as the knowledge becomes much more specialized, there's fewer people that are actually interested in it. And that's very natural. Now, conversely, the dotted line shows how much people are willing to pay. Now, over time, people have gone into the idea, or have become used to the idea of not paying for information, especially if it's very general information. Everyone has access to blogs, to news portals, to websites, newspapers, and you either are getting that for free or paying very little. So on the left-hand side, general knowledge, people don't really pay for it. But as you go up towards the right, for specialized knowledge, completely opposite to the graph, the solid line, is that the willingness to pay goes way up. And so this leads to two observations. These institutions and corporates are no longer willing to pay for general knowledge, but they are willing to pay for specialized, bespoke knowledge. But taking a step back and going back to a quick recap of sharing economies based on tokens. We started out with villages, for example, people and common goods. And people were willing to share these common goods without any sort of value being attached to it. As we scaled, people attached money to it. If you want me to do something, pay me. Okay, so it's very transactional. And we lost a lot of the aspects that we were focused on when you look at sharing economies. Now, if you insert a utility token layer, this is the way where if you control the economics of this layer, you can then remove the over-reliance on fiat money and build a sharing economy based on tokens, which becomes very interesting. And that's what RedPulse does. Quick overview of the RedPulse ecosystem. We're also using the RedPulse RPX token as a driver of a sharing economy for research. Key challenges and trends ahead, and I'll quickly go through this. Creation of a fair and transparent token economy is actually very difficult to do, so you have to spend a lot of time to create a well-functioning one. Reliance on imprecise reputational scoring is also difficult. You have to solve this issue of, well, when you decentralize everything, you no longer have a central governing authority, there has to be some way of scoring value. Third, shifting crypto regulations and compliance frameworks across jurisdictions. And fourth, not so much a challenge, but an interesting trend where incumbents and existing business models are pivoting towards token economics. Not necessarily a bad thing. So that is RedPulse. We are creating the world's first sharing economy for knowledge. Thank you.